about bringing a positive change in Pakistan. And for today, we're going to talk about creating a respectful and harassment-free work environment. And I think this conversation is very timely and it's very important for workplaces in Pakistan. And for that, I'm joined today by brilliant women. I'm going to start off by introducing Ma'am Maliha Husain, who is Executive Director at Mehergarh. She has 20 plus years experience of working on women issues in Pakistan and the United States. And since March 2010, she has been working on nationwide implementation of anti-sexual harassment legislation in Pakistan. And our second panelist is Arzoo Mahmood. Ma'am Arzoo is Vice President who's managing HR relationships of diversified businesses across the banking, across the banks, including conventional commercial, Islamic businesses, centralized control, and support functions. Both of these panelists are not, they are not dependent on any introductions, I must say. I mean, before officially starting this conversation, I must also drop a disclaimer that this conversation is going to be the last conversation, the last webinar of Park Launch for this year, I must say, because for the next round of the webinar will start in 2022. So for 2021, this is the last conversation, and it's also a very special one, I must say. So I think let's start with the conversation, which is on harassment-free workplace, and I'm going to directly start with Arzoo. You. I mean, we talk about the need of having a harassment-free workplace, and this notion of harassment-free workplace has evolved in the recent years. So I want you to take this floor and just highlight why do we need to talk about it in the first place, and why do we need harassment-free workplace in the first place, and what do we mean by it? Over to you.
Right. Thank you so much, Kashmir, and hello, everyone. Well, I'd like to begin our discussion with the universal fact that employees are the biggest and most critical asset of any organization. And the pandemic has proven this fact. Many organizations across the globe that invested in sustainable infrastructure, especially for employees' well-being, thrived and are thriving through this challenging time of COVID-19. I would say where COVID-19 has introduced us to unlimited amount of uncertainties, I feel it has also opened our minds to look at endless possibilities, which we weren't used to before, I would say, because a lot of part of the world, we've seen great many challenges that we've faced and we still are facing because of lack of our ability to adapt to change. So this COVID-19 has given us the possibilities to imagine, to understand and adapt. Organizations today, I would say, have realized the need to take their employees more seriously, even more seriously than before. So it is employee well-being that will ensure sustainable future for the organization. And there are several dimensions, 6 that at least globally are known right now, which I would like to touch base with. I'd like to mention it. It's financial well-being, it's work life, social well-being, emotional well-being, physical well-being, and psychological well-being. All these dimensions are interconnected and they carry significant value for employees, which is why it is important to understand what matters to employees, because we can only understand how employees' well-being relates to the organizational performance. And there is a direct relation between employee well-being and organizational performance, which means that any uncertainty with reference to employees' well-being would directly impact employee engagement. So we can say if the employees feel unsafe, they feel uncertain, or they feel compelled to work in an environment which they do not find healthy, that not only do they not perform in such circumstances, but whatever they do, in fact, negatively impacts the organization. So it's very important to understand what matters to employees, which is why we need to understand why sexual harassment is important to be put into perspective, to understand why and what matters to employees and how the organizations, we as people, we as managers, we as colleagues, peers, subordinates, or even family members can make an impact to make employees' well-being, our well-being, as a community, as a society, as a nation, to have this whole thing in place that is actually needed, which is why we need to talk about it. So this is why what I wanted to share with you initially to set the tone of the discussion that we're going to have today. And from here we can take it forward to our next section of the discussion. Kashun, over to you.
Thank you, Arzoo. And you very eloquently mentioned, the fact that employees need to feel comfortable in the spaces, right? They don't want to feel compelled. They don't want to feel uncomfortable. And that also affects the productivity of the employees. And, that directly affects the women around us. How do we expect them to be productive if they are compelled in a workplace? And talking about compulsion, there are many forms of it, but this is where I want to bring Maliha into the conversation. I know she's done a bunch of work on sexual harassment. It's unparalleled. So Maliha, can you guide us on, what are the forms, what are the manifestations of sexual harassment and what could be done? You're on mute, Maliha.
Yes,
ironically, I was also on mute while I was saying.
I started talking and then realized I was on mute. Sorry. So thank you very much, Kashun, for the introduction, and Arzoo for setting the stage, where we can talk about sexual harassment. I'd like to take a minute to say that sexual harassment is one of the forms of harassment in a work environment that we need to very seriously address. But we also need to realize that, it's important to create a work environment where people feel respected and valued, where they're not discriminated against because of their religion or their level of education or, their economic background or ethnicity or any other reason. They need to be valued as important members of the organization. So creating a respectful environment is very important. We need to give them a reason where they want to get out of bed every morning and come to work. Most of us work because we need to earn a living. But if we provide a respectful environment to our employees, we give them a reason to want to come to work, not because they have to, but because they want to. So there are different forms of harassment, but we are going to focus on sexual harassment today. In Pakistan especially, or among a lot of Pakistanis, it's still a tabooed topic. People don't like to talk about it. And because they don't talk about it, even a lot of educated people don't know what all constitutes sexual harassment. So I would first like to give sort of the definition from the law in Pakistan. The Parliament of Pakistan passed 2 laws in the beginning of 2010. Both of those laws address sexual harassment, one in the formal work sector and one throughout the country in all public and private places. So we need to know how legally, officially, sexual harassment is now defined in Pakistan. And it's any unwelcome sexual advance or request for sexual favor, which might be verbal. So anything that we say or anything that comes out of our mouth, a word or a sentence or, anything which is of a sexual nature, and it makes the other person uncomfortable. is included in sexual harassment. So it doesn't necessarily have to be physical. Anything verbal of a sexual nature, like dirty jokes, for example, innuendos. Then anything in written form, whether it's something inappropriate written on a piece of paper or a text message or using any form of communication, but anything written, or it could be a combination of verbal and written. It could be videos, it could be pictures. And then after that, physical conduct of a sexual nature, which begins with how you look at the other person. If you start staring at the other person or a specific body part of the other person, which makes them uncomfortable, it is sexual harassment. If you are staring at them because of their sex, because of their being a man or a woman or a transgender. So starting with how you look at other people, touching them, pinching them, rubbing your body against them, and it goes all the way up to sexual assault. So anything from staring to sexual assault, everything in between can be considered sexual harassment. So this first part of the definition is kind of easy to understand, but if you look at the rest of the definition, it also includes sexually demeaning attitude, considering the other person to be beneath you because of their sex. At times, women and transgenders are considered or demeaned against. And according to the Pakistani law, that is also included in sexual harassment. Then punishing somebody because they refused your sexual advances is also included in sexual harassment or in the definition given in the law. And also making it a condition either for gaining employment or continuing to work in an organization. So all of these behaviors are included in the definition which is given in the Pakistani law. So we need to be very careful that we don't behave in any of these ways or in any of these manners. And if somebody makes us uncomfortable verbally or by sending us an inappropriate message or physically, it's important for us to know that we are being sexually harassed and we need to stop the other person. Whether the other person is a man or a woman or transgender doesn't really matter. It's not only women who get sexually harassed. The Pakistani law protects men, women, and transgenders from being sexually harassed. Even same-sex harassment is included. So it's important to make sure that all of your employees feel safe and respected and are given an opportunity to work in a dignified environment. So that takes care of what, about 6 minutes or so? I was trying to time myself. So first, knowing what the issue is important, because unless and until we know which issue we're talking about, it's difficult to use any policies or laws to address that issue. So knowing what all constitutes sexual harassment is always the first step, because it's a social issue and we're all socialized with it. We've heard direct and indirect messages about sexual harassment from our family members, from our friends, from our colleagues. So we all have our own ideas of what is sexual harassment. So it's important to know exactly what it is. And then how do you address it in an organization? And I'll talk about one of the laws, one of the two laws that were passed in the beginning of 2010. The special law, it has a long name. It says Protection Against Harassment of Persons in a Workplace. This law can be used within an organization without going to the police or a court of law. It's a special law. It gives a mechanism to all organizations, all registered organizations in the country. which can be used, the mechanism which can be used to handle cases of sexual harassment in confidentiality within the organization. And just because people don't have to go to the police, they can report their case in the organization and get it resolved. A lot of people have started reporting cases. A lot of good organizations that care about the well-being of their employees, they have already complied with this law. As more and more organizations are finding out about it or realizing the importance of institutionalizing the mechanism, they are in the process of complying because they do want to provide a dignified environment to their employees. I will also quickly tell you very briefly what is the mechanism and how do organizations institutionalize it. The law says that every organization is supposed to have a 3-member standing inquiry committee with at least one female member, so that they have both male and female perspectives. I guess as we have more transgenders working in organizations, we might change it to have at least one transgender member of the committee, but for now it's men and women. The law also says that it's the responsibility of the management to make all of their employees aware of what all constitutes sexual harassment. Tell them that Pakistani government passed a law, we have complied with it. These are the 3 members on our standing inquiry committee. If any of you is sexually harassed, report to this committee. They will conduct an inquiry within 30 days. And whatever their decision or their recommendation, it will be implemented within 7 days. So all it takes is 5 weeks from the time a case is reported till the decision of the committee is implemented. The committee is also supposed to, according to the law, handle these cases in confidentiality and make sure that there's no retaliation against either the complainant or if there are any witnesses against them. Because the idea is to improve the work environment, not make things more difficult. So forming a 3-member standing inquiry committee, informing all the employees about it and encouraging them that we want you to speak out. You should not be afraid of either being ridiculed or retaliated against or losing your job. We will take strict action against harassers, whether they're men or women, doesn't matter. A complainant can be a man or a woman or a transgender. Encouraging people to speak out and creating deterrence within the organization. Making sure or telling their employees that we will take strict action against harassers, because we mean it when we say that we want to create zero tolerance for sexual harassment. So the more the employees hear from their employers, from the senior management, with time, they do start speaking out and reporting cases. Because Arzoo, I know, she's been working on this for the last 10 years, and she has been very successful in creating that environment where people feel comfortable speaking out. So I think I can stop here and maybe request Arzoo to share some of her experiences, or maybe just one more point. The law also has a clause where it addresses malified accusations. In case somebody makes a false claim against another person, there is punishment for that too, and the law gives in detail exactly how do you handle that. So there's punishment for or penalty for harassing other people, and there's also a penalty if somebody makes a false claim against another employee. And another thing, maybe it's a little too much detail, but I think it's important to know that the law does protect the employees, but it also protects the people that work with an organization, like the customers that go to a bank are protected under the law. The patients who go to a hospital, if they are harassed by an employee or by a doctor working in the hospital, the patients are protected. Students in a university are protected. The harasser has to be an employee, but the complainant does not need to be an employee. Former employees are also covered or protected under this law. So it is a very comprehensive law. We need to have good intentions of providing a dignified, respectful environment to our employees, and the law gives you a mechanism, a way of how to go about it. So I think I'll stop here and then pass it on to Arzoo. If you could please share some of your experiences, or Kashun, sorry, I think I'm doing your job too. I'll stop here.
Thank you. That's all right. I think I would pass it on to Arzoo Appa, because if I could briefly intervene and mention that you so eloquently mentioned that these are the laws in place, but then how do a person actually, make sure that there is a receptive environment for those places to be actualized and realized, and for women or any employee to feel comfortable to go and report those cases in the first place. So if Arzoo Appa could, briefly put up some comments on that.
Yeah, thank you. I think it starts with the organizations. First, I would say for anybody to feel comfortable to complain about or to highlight their concerns with reference to sexual harassment or for any kind of harassment, I think the faith that an employee or anybody of that person's faith in the organization is very important. Learned a lot of things in this 10 plus years, going through different situations and handling different kind of cases. I've learned a lot as well. And I've developed an understanding that, there are certain things that organizations need to have in place so that they give this confidence to stakeholders. Now, stakeholders can be customers, stakeholders can be employees, can be anybody whose lives these institutions and organizations touch in any manner. So for anyone to be able to complain, there has to be a mechanism, a system in place in those organizations. And how do we do that? I would like to touch base, enunciates the elements that.
Is it just me, or Arzoo Appa, your voice is breaking up a bit?
We can check it. And
I think it's fine. It's fine
right now. All right. I'll just repeat the last thing that I was mentioning. I was saying that, the law broadly enunciates the elements that are covered for an organization to undertake for proper implementation of this law. However, an organization needs to own the code, which does not come by duplicating or copying the code and putting it in your policy. It actually comes into play when you intricately chalk out your own steps and stepwise action plan for effective implementation of this law in letter and spirit. It wasn't easy, I'm telling you. When we started in 2010, because of the topic being a social dilemma and a taboo topic, nobody would talk about it. And even when we would talk about it again and again to reinforce the idea, to create acceptability, it was difficult. But then, a beautiful thing that is called ownership, which is something that I feel proud of because I'm a part of an institution that has always had these value system as part of their ethos. So what we did, we actually tried to understand how this affects our employees, and then we tried to own it by way of making our own certain steps to go about it. Institutions and organizations can do whatever they put their minds and hearts into, And even if you talk about, year-on-year incremental growth or leading the competition or doubling the profit during the COVID times, even a lot of institutions have done a great job in terms of, doing all those things. Why not employees' well-being? So coming from 2010 to these days, we haven't stopped, and we've tried to put in place something that affects our employees perfectly and in a healthy way. So as to give them a conducive environment that ensures that they're engaged with us. Because if they're not engaged, they won't perform. In fact, they become disengaged. And when they become disengaged, the sustainability of the organization gets into, it gets threatened in a way. So although Maliha has just touched base with these points,
your voice is a bit disruptive.
All right. Okay. Is it okay now?
Better.
All right. I think I'll speak slowly. That would work. Yeah. I'll have to do that.
Auntie, it's kind of working.
All right. Okay. So we've just heard Maliha. She mentioned about the steps that the management needs to undertake, in fact, to ensure there is a conducive environment for employees. Let me tell you how we did that in my bank, Habib Metropolitan Bank. We tried to set the tone at the top. So we came from the board, CEO, and the message was passed on to the management committee from there. We developed our anti-sexual harassment policy and clearly communicated the same across the board, across all levels of the pyramid, the organization, so that everybody understands it and understands what happens if this is violated. So then we established communication channels. We had posters, we had email messages, we communicated through intranet, through our corporate communications. Every training in the end would have 5 to 10 minutes of a talk that would relate to sexual harassment or whistleblowing, so that if anybody sees something happening somewhere with anybody, they are able to communicate it to us. And then regularly continue to train our employees to reinforce the idea, break the myths, promote acceptability to work, in a diverse workforce. And then we did one more thing. We made it part of our performance appraisal system. Everybody has a significant weightage given to values of the organization, living the values of the organization, so that if there is a violation, there's a direct impact on their performance and accordingly, the rewards, etc. So this really worked well. And then we made sure that the new hires are culturally aligned when they join us, because being a bank, we have attrition every year. People leave us and people join us. And how do we make sure that the people who are joining us are on the same page? So we continuously reinforce the idea, and new hires are no exception to that. And then we set the right examples. We tell people there is zero tolerance and we exercise zero tolerance. And there are strict punishments, I'm telling you, for the perpetrators. And that has kind of supported us, I would say, helped us in combating sexual harassment. Although we're dealing with people, and people are unique, dynamic, and totally capable of a lot. So we have to keep a check and balance system available. And when this is available, people find, whether it's employees or customers, they find it comfortable and they find themselves confident to let us know that they in one way or the other, and we are able to address them then. Otherwise, if we do not look at those things the way we do, religiously and strictly, people won't have faith in us. And they won't have this engagement level that they have with the institution. I can just share with you that in my institution, the attrition rate, the employee turnover is not as it is in the market. And there are so many reasons for it. One strong reason being we try to support our employees and we try to safeguard their interests. And that includes giving them a dignified environment where they can work with peace of mind and happily and motivated. It's a challenge, it's an ongoing thing. It's nothing that we can achieve in a day or 2 or 10 years or 15. I think it's going to go a long way. And that's how it's going to be. It's a long journey and it's still going on. So yeah, finger crossed, let's see. Inshallah, things go well. We will keep on having this intent in our hearts because the institution has decided that it's never going to compromise on employees' well-being. So that's how it is.
Yeah, that's perfect. I mean, a couple of takeaways from that. And we also have a question from the audience, which echoes what you just said. I mean, and the question is from Ehtisham Ahmed Khan, and he says that law comes into action after the incident. So what's your opinion on establishing a culture which ensures respect and safety and dignity to the employees and eliminates the chances of sexual harassment? And I know, Arzoo Appa, you just kind of gave a couple of things to put into the institutional chart as to check the chances of sexual harassment. The one that I personally really liked was the performance appraisal system, and that kind of puts into the place the fact that there's zero tolerance for such actions. I want to bring in Maliha into the conversation here. That what's your take on establishing such cultures where sexual harassment is not tolerated at all, so the chances of such cases are eliminated.
Right. Thank you. Talking about the question that Ehtisham just asked, the law does not come into play after a case is reported. It actually makes organizations or managements of organizations institutionalize the mechanism. And when it says that you need to ensure, or tells the managements to ensure proper implementation, and when the managements of organizations inform their employees that we will have zero tolerance for sexual harassment in our organization, and if anyone harasses, we will hold them accountable, we will take action, you are actually creating deterrence. So before a case is reported, the management is putting the mechanism in place according to the law, informing everyone who works there that we don't want you to behave inappropriately towards one another. If you do, we will take action. So just doing that initially starts creating that culture of respect. And then after that, once you've informed your employees, if still somebody harasses another colleague or a subordinate, the management or the organization or the inquiry committee holds them accountable. So you send out a second level of message to all the employees that we weren't only talking about it, we are taking action as well. So handling cases is one thing, but creating that environment is also a part of properly implementing the law. It does help in creating that culture of respect and dignity, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, perfectly makes sense. I have another interesting question which says, what happens when it's one person's word against another?
Yeah. Arzoo, would you like to, or shall I?
I think you both of you should.
Okay. All right.
Okay, you started, please.
All right. Yes, in most cases of sexual harassment, there is no evidence or witnesses. So when we conduct awareness sessions for employees, we always tell them that if somebody sent you a message or a video inappropriate or anything, don't delete it, because that is what most people do. As soon as they receive something inappropriate, they delete it because they don't want anybody to see it in your phone. Or however it was sent to you. Which means that you are destroying evidence. So it's important to hold on to whatever evidence there is. And when a standing inquiry committee starts conducting an inquiry, there are ways of finding out what the facts were. Even if it's one person's word against the other, people generally who are in the habit of harassing don't only harass one person once. They do it more than once, and they do it with more than one people. So when the inquiry committee members start talking to people around the complainant and around the harasser, they usually get additional information from them, which helps them to decide, or which helps them to assess, what happened, and how will they handle it. At times, I've seen cases where the case that was reported to the inquiry committee gave us, a certain incidents or a number of incidents of what they've been going through. And when the inquiry committee starts talking to the other people around or who work with the harasser, the same harasser, male or female, doesn't matter, they get to hear cases that are a lot more serious than the one that was reported to them. So there are ways of finding the facts. These people might refuse to go to a court of law if this case was in a court, but when they're talking to their colleagues who are committee members, and it also depends on how the committee members talk to these people, to their colleagues, and ask them for information or ask them to share facts. Because creating a dignified and respectful work environment is not only the job of the management or the inquiry committee. Every employee has to play their role. And this is something that is communicated to them in the beginning, saying that, if we all want to improve our work environment, we'll have to play our role. The inquiry committee or the management alone cannot do it. So, reminding them that if you know something, we would appreciate if you would share that with us. So there are ways of, you have to get creative, you have to put on your detective hat, and you can find out, not necessarily one person's word against the other, but there are ways of finding out what the facts were. Arzoo, if you would like to add to it. I know we both have had a lot of cases.
Yeah, I would like to share with the audience another aspect of it. You've shared one aspect. There's another aspect that I'll share with them, again, based on my experience. Now, I'll share with you two aspects. One is where it's one person's words against the other, and it's the real situation, actually, because there are such situations where there are no witnesses, no evidences, no proof whatsoever of whatever has happened, and whatever one person has done to the other. And that situation was where one of our, the harasser accused was our employee, and the complainant was also our employee. 10 years or 10 years plus of experience with the bank, unblemished career, clean, no problems whatsoever, no single complaint. When we did our 360 degree, we didn't find anything about that person. Now, that's the huge responsibility comes on the shoulders of the committee members to do the inquiry in a way that it transpires who was wrong and actually whose fault it was, and if the complaint was authentic. So, when there are statements from the complainant and the harasser, we have to analyze both statements very minutely, and we prepare our questions accordingly, and then we actually probe into those areas. And there have been at least 3 cases that I have experienced in last 10 years that we've been able to solve like this, although we did have sleepless nights because it wasn't easy. You cannot just blame somebody for something they haven't done, and you don't, when in absence of any proof or evidence, you don't even know how to prove it if they did something wrong. So, but yes, when the inquiry committee looks into the statements of the complainant and the harasser and minutely and then analyzes it, it gets easy to probe the right questions, and then during the whole conversation, inquiry committee proceedings, people crack. And you get to know who was at fault, and you then probe more, and you get to the the bottom of it. That's one case. Another case was where the complainant was not an employee of the bank, but the accused was, right? So, and that was a fake complaint. And we only came to know of this complaint being fake when we were conducting the inquiry. And during that inquiry, before that, we had statements and we had everything. But when we were questioning the complainant, it transpired that, and it took us around 1.5 hours of discussion. And after that, we realized that the woman who had complained against one of our employees was lying. And it was just because it was it's a vindictive kind of a thing that she was doing. So my point is, when there are no evidences, which there are none at times, the only thing that we have is the statements of the people, both sides, and then the way we study the statements and the questions we, develop out of those statements. And they help us a lot. This code of conduct is a beautiful document. I'm telling you, I have my own copy, has become this thick because I have my notes on that, and it's pretty helpful. Every time that I get stuck somewhere, I just go back and I read it and I read it again, and it definitely does help. So yeah, I hope it helps.
And this code of conduct is available on ASHA's website. ASHA was the Alliance Against Sexual Harassment, which worked for 10 years. It was a voluntary movement of a lot of people throughout the country, led by Dr. Fawzia Saeed. And they have a website. The ASHA movement was closed 2 years after the laws were passed, but we kept the website alive. And this code of conduct that Arzoo is talking about is available in English and Urdu on the website. So the website is ASHA, ASHA.org.pk. So if you go there on the homepage center panel, it's all downloadable documents. So this code of conduct is also available there. You can get it. Copy of the law and the code of conduct both.
I was just going to say that we should, make this code of conduct accessible to our audience because it's excellent. And again, even if we have a jury in place for any organization, they need to be aware of the fact. I mean, I know that Arzoo ma'am has a lot of experience that also adds to it along with the code of conduct, but not every other organizational authority is as of an expert. And then sometimes also that comes into question. So again, for the audience, please access the code of conduct for better judgment and to put in better laws in your organization. There's another question which is directed towards Arzoo ma'am, which says, is there any recommendation for doing the cultural assessment while acquiring talent?
Cultural assessment while acquiring talent. I think we do have ways of going about it. Not entirely about acquiring talent, but we also assess our own organizational culture after some time. For example, after every 3-4 years, we conduct a survey, which is called an employee engagement survey. And sometimes you do a climate survey as well. Organizations do that. You need to actually come up with the drivers that you want to be part of the survey. I mean, what do you want the survey to give you as a result? And based on that result, for example, if you want to know what kind of culture does the organization have so that you are able to hire people accordingly, if I've understood your question correctly, that's your question. I think you can understand what kind of sentiment and culture exists in the organization. You can talk about how the values are lived in the organization. You can ask people about that, the questions on values. If the supervisors live the values, if the peers live the values, is the management seen to live the values? Do they care about their employees? Are the employees developed? Are they rewarded? if the performance is actually assessed in a competitive way, the way it's done in the market. These are some of the things that we include in our surveys, but these climate surveys or employee engagement surveys can give you actual feel of the employees, how they perceive the organization, so that you understand. A lot of times, this is one way the organization thinks of itself, and this is another way the employees think of the organization. How do you understand? When you do the climate survey, you bridge the gap and you have one common thing that gives you an understanding how employees look at you as an organization. And then from there, you can have an employee engagement survey done with the results that you want to achieve out of that. I hope I've answered your question in some way.
Yeah, there's a thank you for you in the chat box.
Thank you.
And then we have two questions which are pretty much the same. So I'm going to merge them and make it one question, which says that why do we see an increase in the cases of sexual harassment globally, all over the world, and particularly in the corporate sector?
May I?
Yes, please, ma'am.
Okay. I personally don't think that there's an increase in cases. It's just that people have started talking about it now. There was sexual harassment even earlier, but nobody globally talked about. You know, when the Me Too movement started, we saw how very old cases were brought out. There's been a lot of work done, I know, in Pakistan, and I'm sure in other countries also, where people have been very seriously working on realizing the prevalence of this issue in our societies. It is a global issue wherever you have. It's an issue of human behavior, and wherever you have human beings, you will have this problem, or we do have this problem. But because of the stigma attached to sexual harassment, people did not want to talk about it. A lot of people still don't. But over the years, a lot of work has been done where people have been encouraged to address this issue. You know, break the silence. Unless and until we report a case, we talk about it, we will have to continue facing it. So if you don't want to face this issue, you have to talk about it to get your problem resolved. So just because a lot of work has been done on it and people have been encouraged to speak out, they are speaking out. So that, in my view, is a very positive sign. Because the more people talk about it, the more we can address their issue. And once, you know, we start punishing harassers, others get a message that, okay, if I don't want to lose my job, I better improve my behavior. So this is how you create deterrence. So in my view, it's not increasing. It's being reported and resolved. The more people report it, the more cases are resolved. Eventually, it won't go away completely, but you know, it will be controlled more. People will know that, you know, if we do this, if we behave this way, there will be consequences. It won't go unnoticed. So in my view, this is a very positive sign, what is happening now. We're moving in the right direction.
May I add something to it?
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Sorry, Kashmir, I'm so used to being in charge. Okay.
I think you're absolutely right. What Ma'am Maliha said is absolutely right. If it's been happening, it hasn't stopped ever. But the reason why it's increasing these days and why we see a lot of things happening around us, it's because, one, awareness has increased. When I was a little girl, my mother never talked about it. She never used the word sex ever. Even if I say it right now in front of her, she feels a little shy. She doesn't even look at me. And she feels that it's a wrong word to be used, should not be used. Fast forward, my daughter's generation. Now, people are taught in schools, good touch, bad touch, good thing, bad thing, what should you not, what you shouldn't allow, what is all right, what's not all right. So now people are more aware. The new generation is more aware of these things, and they are vocal. They don't want to be suppressed. They don't feel like it. My generation, even my generation, was some people like me would never speak out because it would be seen as negative, it would be seen as inappropriate, and probably I will be blamed for it. That's why a lot of people don't, even men won't say anything about it. But now the new generation has started this brave thing that they are more aware and they want something to happen about it. So yeah, I think that's the reason why we feel that it has increased.
And then, yes, if I could, bring another question into this. And speaking of being conscious of the fact that something that happened to you is equivalent to an harassment case being filed. And the more cases which we see coming up are of sexual harassment. But this is something that Maliha ma'am also mentioned in the beginning of the webinar, that harassment is not only sexual, it's also verbal. And most of the people and employees do not really realize these days that there's a verbal harassment that they need to put, that they need to check and put draw a line towards it. How do you, if Maliha, you and Arzoo, if you could, just briefly mention that ABC is how verbal harassment is like, what are the manifestations, and when should employees draw a line when it comes to verbal harassment? Because that's something that people are not really conscious of these days.
Arzoo, would you like to, or shall I?
Please, you go ahead. I'll do it after you.
See, sexual harassment, like we talked about the definition in the beginning, it does not necessarily have to be physical. Even if you say a word because of the sex of the other person, which makes them uncomfortable, something inappropriate, that is also considered sexual harassment. The way you look at the other person and the crooked smile and the sparkle in your eyes, and maybe you whistle or you say a word because of the sex, or because of the other person being a man or a woman or a transgender, it is sexual in nature, or because of the sex of the other person. Even that is sexual harassment. So it's important when an organization complies with the law, it's important to educate your employees and tell them what all constitutes sexual harassment. It can be from men to women, a small percentage of men harassing a lot of women, or it could be from like same-sex harassment, one male employee harassing another male colleague or a subordinate. It could be from women to men, it could be from women to women, it could be men and women sexually harassing, passing inappropriate comments towards transgender employees. So, sorry, I think I missed part of your question, but verbal can also be sexual, right? Even like in Pakistani society, I don't know how many of your participants here are not Pakistanis. The names that I can see sound like Pakistani names. Words in Arabic, saying something like mashallah to a person that you should not be saying it to, depending on the relationship of the two people, if it makes the other person uncomfortable, even that can be considered sexual harassment. So it's a word. It's a good word. But how you say it, who do you say it to? will determine whether it is sexual harassment or not. Right? Arzoo, would you like to add to it?
Yeah, just a little bit. I think apart from sexual harassment, if you talk about verbal statements or verbal things that people usually use for harassment or for harassing people, could be a colleague imposing their wish of being friends with you, perhaps. It may not be sexual, but it may be harassment. You may not like it at all. You would probably feel burdened or pressured by those statements. That's harassment. Something that's related to your performance, taunting you on your performance, comparing you with others, which is not appropriate if it's not directly related. That could be harassment. Discriminatory statements, whether it's related to your marital status or your appearance or your dressing or the way you talk to people or appear in meetings or any occasions. You know, these statements, we often do not pay much attention to these things, but there are things that now that I pay attention to and I think about, I reflect, I feel this is harassment. And why did I tolerate it for such a long time? Because I didn't feel, they were such trivias, I didn't even give importance to them, but they kept bothering me for a while. And now that I've read about these things, I understand it's so difficult for so many people who haven't gone through this process, who haven't read the code, who haven't spoken to people who've been in this business or who've been, you know, handling these things. It's pretty difficult for them to even ascertain if what they're going through or they went through was actual harassment or not. So yeah, that could be, these are some of the examples that I could just come up with right now.
Yeah, and if I could also briefly mention, just building on what Arzoo ma'am said, that verbal harassment is actually, you know, it could be anything related to your personal life as well. So your personal relationships, the way you sit, the way you behave, the way you talk. And sometimes in some organizations, harassment is not always visible. You know, it's sometimes ingrained in the policies. Sometimes it's in the structural policies, and we haven't reached that point yet. But I think, as Maliha ma'am said, we're moving in the right direction. I think that, you know, paternal leave and maternal leave is something that will also count in harassment in the years to come. You know, because how is a woman expected to take certain leave and then not expected to have a promotion, and all these factors kind of bring into the considerations of productivity of an employee in the organization. And when these are productivity is associated with the personal dynamics of an employee, that's somehow harassment. I think I've kind of made it a bit complicated, but that's something to ponder on. And with this, we're moving to the end of our webinar. So I'll move back to Maliha ma'am and Arzoo ma'am for concluding remarks, if any, and we'll close with them. Maliha ma'am, if you could go first.
Yes, I think I would only like to say that we all, I think I said that in the beginning also, we all work because we need to take care of our financial responsibility. You know, we work to earn a living. If organizations provide a respectful, dignified environment to their employees, earning becomes a pleasure. You don't do it because you have to, you do it because you like doing it. So creating that respectful environment is very important, and the managements can play a very important role in that. If they intend to clean out their work environment, this law gives you a way of, you know, how do you go about it? It's a very comprehensive law. I would request all of our participants to read it at least once. It's very detailed, gives very detailed instructions on how to go about it. And like Arzoo always says, you know, you have to have the intentions and you can do it. Thank you.
All right, just to conclude it, my concluding remarks would be, I've always believed that we have a choice in every situation. No matter what we are faced with, we always have a choice. And I always, because I take interviews every day, when I meet people, I tell them, it's not my choice as an organization to approve or reject you, or to accept or reject you. It's your choice as well to see if you would like to work with us. If you find us as an organization, you would want to work or invest your energies, time, and dedication into. So I think people should check the organizations and make the right choice. See if the intent exists or is there in the organization to do good for their employees' well-being. If not, do not go there. The only reason why I have been with this institution for more than 10 years is because I know their intent is to work for all stakeholders, including the employees, and for everybody's betterment. So make the right choice, and we always have a choice in every situation. That's my belief. I've seen it in these many years of life. And when you have intent, nothing goes wrong. A lot of times things are not in our control, but when there are things are in our control, we try and work towards it. Our circle of influence increases and the circle of concern kind of squeezes. And that is where you bring in the change that you are here for in this world. So just go and bring the change. That's it.
Very well said. Good.
Yeah, so we're beautifully ending it with the note, the note on intent and the fact that you need to speak up against behaviors, against injustices, if I may say so. And as Maliha Appa, taking the lead from her, we are in a situation where things are going to evolve, and evolution of the law is also what we're talking about. If 3-member committee involves one woman, in the years to come, it will also involve one transgender. So we're going to evolve and we are moving into the better direction. So please, also ending on the note, please read the law. If you find time, please find time. If you don't have time, also second, access the code of, also access the code of conduct, input it as mandatory document in your organizations. This is how we create cultures of inclusivity. And this is it. But with this, Park Launch also signs off. This is the last webinar of the year, but many more and excellent ones to come. Thank you, Park Launch, for also giving me the opportunity to moderate. And Maliha Appa and Arzoo Appa, it's always a delight to listen to both of you. So thank you so much. And with this, we sign off.
Thank you.